My name is Jason Murphy, and this is Against the Stream, Wednesday night. Let's just take a few minutes and kind of ground in, kind of arrive here. So we'll just take a few moments, just hearing the bell. Opening up to the comings and goings of sound. Connecting with the breath and the body. And arriving here. This space. This moment. Just allowing the eyes to open. Open the body any way you feel like you need to or want to. Thought we would just take a moment and arrive. You know, whether you're at home or you just drove through traffic or whatever the situation was, sometimes it just takes a moment to really arrive. Oftentimes, our bodies arrive before our minds do. Sometimes I think about coming to meditation groups, and there's kind of like the hour before arriving to the meditation group, like the preparing or perhaps the getting the motivation or the creating the space. And then there's the time that you're here. And then sometimes there's the hour after of just kind of acknowledging or processing maybe what came up for you during the meditation or during the discussion. So I think it's useful to just make space for that, make time for that. So I'm going to do things a little differently tonight. I've been going through the Brahma Viharas or the sublime abodes. And generally what we do here is we have a meditation and then we have a discussion about some topic, hopefully related to the meditation or not. Yet when working with the sublime abodes or the Brahma Viharas, the heart practices, I feel like sometimes it's helpful to do some front loading. Front loading meaning kind of discussing the theme and then ending with the meditation and then opening up for some discussion or some questions after that. So I'm going to do that tonight. But before we do that, I'd actually like for you guys to have a little discussion with each other. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to pair up with someone that you did not come here with. Someone that you don't know very well. And it might mean that we have one, we can mostly do dyads, but it might mean that we have one triad. So I'd like for you to kind of just turn towards or get up and move so that you're going to be with someone that you didn't come here with. Since sometimes we sit next to the people that we have arrived with. So All right, so this is your triad then? Okay. And for those of you at home, perhaps you can just reflect on this, or you can maybe journal about it. But the question is, the inquiry is, what does forgiveness mean to you? Or what does it mean to forgive? And just take about a minute each and just kind of have, it is a practice. You're listening, one person is speaking, and then you're just going to kind of be listening, but listening in the sense of like 80% of your experience or 80% of your attention is focused on yourself. And about 20% is really focused on listening to what this other person is saying. So you're still listening, but you're also just aware of what is happening as you're listening. Okay? So, and then we'll take an extra minute so that you can have the third person. Okay? So, the first minute, and I'll keep track. The first minute will just be one person. So the person that is the youngest goes first. Okay, and so figure that out. Did you figure that out? Okay, and then so again the reflection is what does forgiveness mean to you? And go ahead and just take a minute, and then the other person is listening. Go. So kind of the idea is, well, first of all, just to kind of have some discussion around, what is forgiveness, right? How do we sit with it? In my investigation of the Buddhist teachings, there actually is some discussion around this idea of forgiveness within the Buddhist teachings. And it's specifically talked about as kamma, which is similar to karma. And I'm going to give you kind of the translation. So in Pali, the word for forgiveness, which also encompasses reconciliation. So the one of the ways to kind of think about it is that when we're talking about forgiveness, we're also talking about reconciling. And I'll talk more about that, but that's what the word means. It also means the earth. This word kamma, which is Khama. And so here's just some. So there's a couple places that it's talked about, and this is Tanjef or Tianasaru Bhikkhu. In his translation, he's the abbot of Meadow Forest Monastery in San Diego. And so he talks about this understanding of forgiveness and or karma is a mind like the earth, right, is non-reactive and unperturbed. When you forgive me for harming you, you decide not to retaliate or to seek no revenge. You do not need to like me. You simply unburden yourself of the weight of resentment and cut the cycle of this retribution that would otherwise keep us ensnarled in the ugliness of samsara. So I like that talks about forgiveness. First, within the Buddhist teachings, that there is some place for it, I think a few weeks ago, and it's not really thought of as one of the heart practices or one of the Brahma Viharas. Yet at the same time, it is found within the Buddhist teachings. And of course, this understanding of reconciliation and what happens when there's discord, which is really all of what the Brahma Viharas are about. They're all of what this heart practice is really leaning towards, and definitely in my experience. So just to kind of recap, I'm going to go over all of the Brahma Viharas again, but I'm going to give a little bit of a different understanding So these heart practices, before I talked about them as like similar to the anatomical heart, where there's these 4 chambers that are working together to keep us alive, to keep us, flourishing, to keep us functional, balanced, And then, the way in which the heart, the anatomical heart, actually feeds the rest of the body and feeds our life. So that's one way to kind of view it. Another way that I like to think about it, in Buddhism, there's this moment where in the Buddhist story, there's a moment where the Buddha kind of where he sees Mara, he sees the torments of mind, he sees the personification of, in Buddhist psychology, we can call it the ego, or this, this tyrant that's constantly trying to keep us in delusion, and that's personified as a being. But I think it's really like seeing the construct of how we get caught in greed, hatred, and delusion, and sometimes, for years or for lifetimes, we don't even know that we're caught. I think that's particularly true with delusion. We don't even really know that we're having, this narrative, this false narrative that we've been building up. And so seeing clearly when the Buddha kind of awakens, he talks about how the ridgepole is broken and how he's seen the builder of the house, right, being Mara. And so in some ways kind of tearing down the walls of delusion and seeing clearly. So I like to think of the heart practices actually as a house. And so one of the ways I look at it is like metta, this loving kindness, this positive regard is the solid foundation. It's the beginning point. First we're building a foundation of, in my experience, a general sense of kindness or friendliness towards all beings, which is a direct kind of counter to a negative state of mind, or this kind of, everyone is out to get me, or, this kind of what can also be kind of fed into delusion. So this foundation, this is where we start. It's like this general, almost all the teachings point to this kind of general, broad, can I just see all beings with a positive regard, in a positive light, at least working towards that. And then even getting more specifically into, those I love, those I care for, those that are maybe challenging for me, maybe the neutral person, the average just person walking down the street. We kind of work with different, and then the difficult person, or the person that we maybe hold resentment towards or has harmed us in some way. So this is kind of the foundation. And then forgiveness, I see forgiveness as the floor, which we stand on. This kind of understanding of, if we can live in this act of forgiveness, or this, it's not just an event, it's actually a process. So we can forgive, and that gives us more stability in our own hearts and our own minds. And then so from there, building up the walls, the structure, framing the house with walls and rooms is what we consider kind of compassion or selfless joy. So if we're thinking about beams and walls and this kind of thing. I used to do construction, so that's kind of where I came up with this analogy. And I like that it's the juxtaposition of, once we've broken down our old habits of mind, the destructive maybe mind states or behaviors, and we've begun to kind of see a little bit more clearly, then learning to rebuild in a new way, seeing things from a different perspective. So karuna and mudita, or compassion and selfless joy, being the walls, and then equanimity or emotional balance being really the roof that holds it all together, and then protects others and us from the storms of life. Because just because we've seen clearly, like in the story of the Buddha's awakening, Mara doesn't go away. Delusion doesn't disappear. Ignorance doesn't disappear. Confusion doesn't disappear. Matter of fact, it's at every turn. Resentment doesn't go away, but we can learn to see it clearly and to shift. And this is what I believe the heart practices are really helping us to do. So hopefully that makes some sense. So the heart practices and really all of the Buddhist teachings are kind of aimed at giving us tools or release from what are called the hindrances. These things that are hindering us from peace and ease, that are hindering us from peace and ease, our own good nature, our original goodness. Sometimes it's talked of as like the Buddha Dharma, like these are the obstacles, the things that are getting in the way, or the opportunities. Right? When we can learn to be skillful, and we can learn to meet our own suffering with compassion, like we kind of talked about last week, then we can hopefully have more of a skillful means to work with our suffering and to see it clearly. And then also the suffering in others. So that's one of the ways I like to kind of think about it. And then I'll just mention, so what are the hindrances? What are the, in the Buddhist psychological understanding or from the Buddhist perspective, what are the things that are getting in our way? Well, here's a list. Aversion, dislike, this kind of pushing away, avoidance, anger, ill will. This is really what we're talking about when we're talking about dealing with some of the heart practices. And then also sensual desire. And what that's mean, it's like wanting or craving, fantasy, checking out, numbing out perhaps, seeking pleasurable experience as a way to avoid unpleasurable experience. And then the other is, the sloth and torpor, or like sleepiness. Sometimes I call it sinking mind. Sinking mind is kind of this numbness that can kind of happen when maybe we're overloaded or emotionally overloaded. I once was working with, I work with clients. I'm a therapist. And I once was working with a client who, when this person got into talking about very difficult emotional content, they would literally start to fall asleep right in front of me. And it wasn't that they were tired. It was a defense mechanism. And then we began to kind of work with that. And that's what I kind of think sinking mind or sluggishness of mind that it is pointing to. So then there's the other side of that, which is restlessness, agitation, is kind of being busy, being distracted, kind of constantly finding a way to kind of stay. I think our society really rewards this behavior, rewards this distractive behavior. Like if there's something you can do besides just sitting here and being with whatever you're experiencing, do that. Sometimes distraction can be a skillful means for a period of time, but not as a general operating procedure, right? That's what's, I talk with people all day, every day around what's going on for them and what they're struggling with. And very often what I hear is depression and anxiety. And so what is depression? But, this maybe anger turned inward, or what is depression? Maybe this kind of constant, regret, remorse, going backwards in time and replaying, rehashing. What is anxiety? But this constant kind of moving forward and like anticipation and worry and planning, these movements of the mind. And then there's doubt, this questioning, the lack of belief in the benefits of meditation, or that anything that is being kind of talked about in the Buddhist teaching is true, or that it has benefit. So these are known as the hindrances. And I think specifically what we're working with a lot when we're working with forgiveness is remorse, regret, resentment, anger, avoidance. So I want to kind of focus a little bit on anger, because I feel like for years I didn't officially call myself this, but I was like the angry Buddhist. Like I was just, and I talk about it kind of all the time, because it's what's interesting is actually it's become a little bit of a narrative of like, because I used to believe I am angry. And actually this practice has taught me to believe that I'm not angry, but I have anger. Anger arises and it passes away, and I don't need to attach to it. This is what this practice has taught me. And then also having compassion for that. And like, why has that been a condition that I've developed, right? And for a long time, I think in a lot of Buddhist circles, there was this kind of connotation that to be spiritual or to be Buddhist or to be a meditator or to be a yogi, you can't be angry. And I was like, oh, I must be totally doing it wrong because I'm pissed. And I had a lot of reasons to be. And when I would sit and I would meditate, and all this anger would come up. And I've actually began to use that as my practice. So anyway, I've looked quite a bit at this kind of aversion, this hindrance of anger and how it gets in the way. So some of us consider this kind of a habit of mind. And, like I talked about before, the Buddha gave metta as an antidote to these reactive aspects of mind. And it's not our fault. We're not to blame. We have reactive states of mind due to causes and conditions. And I think it's important to recognize that. And that was one of the things that I had to, because I was kind of like, oh, I'm not getting this. I'm not getting this meditation stuff because I'm still angry after 10 years of meditation. I'm not doing it right. I'm not doing it enough. All of these, the doubts started to kick in. And this is kind of how hindrances work. One of my teachers called it the MHA, the multi-hindrance attack, right? When we have anger and we have doubt and we have, sensual pleasure and, fantasy, sleepiness, all kind of coming at us at different points, maybe within a 20-minute meditation period, right? And just to really see it all for what it is, but passing phenomena and reactive states. So what is anger? What is, emotion, especially the reactive states of emotion? And also, I guess another way to kind of think about it is, what's the opposite of anger but fear? That's also part of aversion. Right? So this way of looking at what's anger. Anger is this kind of fight mentality, this kind of pushing away of experience by getting strong or getting big or being reactive outwardly. And then what's fear? Well, fear is avoidance. It's another form of aversion. And I tend to see them, I call them like they're like cousins, and whether sometimes people are in a fear state, which actually causes more anxiety. And then, maybe they're in an angry state, which, on the other side of anger, there can be, depression, regret, remorse. So just to kind of see that too. But I also just want to drop it down to, these are instinctual, biological imperatives that we've had. That's why we're here, because we have this reptilian brain that has these drives that tells us fight, flight, freeze, right? So learning, and this is what I love about meditation and particularly about the heart practices and bringing in forgiveness, is that we can begin to be less reactive and just see them for what they are. I get in a fight mode where I'm going to argue with people. And it happens in maybe little ways, right? Where we can't let an argument go, or if we feel slighted in some way, like I feel like this, I see opportunities to see this reactive state of mind for me all the time. And over the years, I've been able to react less and respond more. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, because I'm absolutely not. But that's my state, tends to be that reactive kind of fight state. And then flight is this avoidance state. This kind of, can I kind of find a way to navigate away from anything that feels somewhat threatening to me, emotionally, physically? Yeah. Sometimes, I notice that people use this avoidance. They actually use meditation as an avoidance strategy. Like, if I can just learn to concentrate my mind, or if I can just go on stay in a month-long meditation retreat, then I won't have to actually deal with anything else. Or if I just do loving kindness all the time, then I'll be in this kind of blissed out state. So there's an avoidance strategy. Sometimes people call it spiritual bypassing. It's a way of avoiding contact with emotion and others, and this kind of reconciliation process. And the Buddha, in the Buddha's teachings, talked about that he had come across this, this finding really concentrated states and checking out and getting these blissful kind of physical and even psychological states. But then when he would come out of meditation, he would see that nothing had changed. He hadn't really gained much insight, much wisdom. That the insight and the wisdom that we talk about here comes from contact and reconciliation, internally and externally. That's been my experience. We have to talk about like the rock tumbler. Noah talks about the rock tumbler. One of my teachers talked about it as stones in the stream that bump up against each other to smooth off our edges. This is something that we need in life. Like, we need each other. We need difficulty. It helps us awaken. I think I've definitely talked about it here before, but this idea that there's a Tibetan saying that it's like a prayer, and it says, may you have the appropriate amount of suffering, right, to wake up. You have the appropriate amount of suffering to begin to do this difficult journey of looking within. Yeah. So forgiveness, is a skillful means. And the way that I feel like it fits is, so we start with the foundation of positive regard, and we can send that positive regard to our own thoughts, to our own experiences, and then also as a way to kind of combat building up resentment in the here and now, like either in the here and now or in the past. And sometimes that won't work because there's too much resentment built up. And so one of the ways to kind of think about this is, okay, if I can develop some compassion for my own suffering. We talked about that last week, and we did a guided meditation practice, which we're going to do a guided meditation practice on forgiveness in just a little bit. But this idea of, can I learn to forgive, and what does that mean? Can I forgive myself? Can I forgive others? Those who have harmed me, can I ask for forgiveness for those who I have harmed? This is really the antidote to resentment, the antidote to disharmony. It's finding a way to work with forgiveness. And one of the ways in which, sometimes people talk about is that forgiveness means like I said earlier, it's an event. Oh, well, I've forgiven that person, so I'm no longer resentful of them. And I have found that doesn't actually hold true, that I can forgive in one moment and then, be resentful in the next moment, right? Or in the next holiday, or the next, family encounter, or the next work day, So continuing with that practice. And there's this way in which sometimes, that we have to forgive everyone, and even the worst offender. And I think just like I talked about last week with compassion, this idea of, some people it's hard to, or some events or some situations it might be hard to extend compassion to right away. So we can start small. Or maybe the idea of turning compassion onto ourselves may be difficult at first, so we can start with another. Same thing with forgiveness. Sometimes extending forgiveness to another seems impossible because it means that we have to let go, which biologically, instinctually feels like we can't do that because we have to remember this person hurt me or this person wronged me in some way, and we have to hold on to resentment. And right, that's the hot coal that burns us. So this idea of forgiveness doesn't mean that we have to go to the worst offender, particularly right away. Right? It's actually more beneficial to start with something small and then build up. If you're a surfer, you don't go to the big island, or you don't go to Mavericks and try to surf huge waves. First time out, you're going to die. You get pummeled. Same thing is true. We have to start with maybe little longboard waves, a little short break or something, or even boogie board, or just body surf. But to get out there, to engage, to do that. Same thing I think is true with this forgiveness practice. So this idea of we can forgive others and we can also protect ourselves. And forgiveness doesn't mean that we just fling the doors of our heart open and say, all right, I forgive you, like come, be a part of my life. There's some good reasons why we may have had to protect ourselves or had to distance ourselves. So like the reading that I spoke of earlier, this is a process where we're letting go of either the need to retaliate or the need to, just to kind of to hold on to the anger or the resentment. Let's see, this is a skillful means. So, for years, I held a lot of resentment. So personally, the way that I've worked with forgiveness and this forgiveness practice has been primarily around my parents, my family, and then, others in my life who they kind of started. It started there, actually. It started with my family because of I've spoken a little bit about the way I grew up, what happened, things that happened before I was old enough to know the difference. That's my story. And I carried that for a long time. And it's when I started to do this work around anger and, like using the metta phrase, like, may I feel safe. Once I was able to get beyond the anger, there was sadness and there was fear that was from childhood. It's from being in unsafe situations, from having, things happen that weren't okay. So part of using these repeated phrases and using this heart practice as it's often talked about is like an excavation process. Why do we suffer? Well, one of the ways that I like to think about it is that we couldn't, for whatever reason, or we didn't attend to the wound. And so we create more and more suffering as a way to kind of cover up or avoid. Of course, this isn't necessarily conscious. This is just kind of a instinctual behavior. So I started with my dad, actually. So my dad, he just wasn't around, right? He didn't want to have a relationship with me, and I felt like there was something wrong with me because of that. And then years go by, and reaching out and trying to reconcile. And in the 12-step program that I've been involved in, there's this idea of making amends. And so that kind of started the process. I made amends. But first, actually, I wrote him a hate letter. I wrote him a letter telling him about all the things that I wanted to tell him. And I sent it to him. And then he responded. And that opened a window. And then, we had some interaction. And then that opened a door. And then I was able to make some amends, which means cleaning my side of the street. I'm sorry or I apologize for the ways in which I have thought ill about you. I have pushed you away when you've reached out to me as a way to punish you. These are some of the things that I said to my father. And that, over years, kind of opened into actually taking on a formal forgiveness practice, which softened the edges. And to my father's dying day, we didn't have a close relationship, but we were clean. I cleaned my side of the street, and through my practice, we were able to have as much contact as was necessary for him to clean his side of the street. My father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer due to alcoholism and drug addiction. And that's a fatal diagnosis. And he didn't tell anyone. And 3 months before he died, I just gotten back from India, and he gave me a call. This is years, this is in 2008. So this was several years ago and several years into my practice. And we just had this conversation where he, just kind of answered all the questions, and there was able to be this kind of that reconciliation that maybe I was looking for. And then 3 months later, I got a call that he had died. And I felt clean. I felt good about it. I was grateful. And I was grateful for this practice. So similar things have happened. That's just one example, but similar things have happened, like with my mother, she just passed recently in September. And, with my mother, it was a much more close relationship, and there was much more conflict because we were in each other's space. So this understanding of finding reconciliation. And I'm really grateful. Like, my mom knew she was dying for a long time. She had congestive heart failure. And due to her drug addiction, actually. And every time that resentment would spike back up, I would just use a forgiveness phrase. Or every time that I would pull away, I would use a forgiveness phrase. And the simple version, we're going to do a little bit of a longer version tonight, but the simple version is, please forgive me. I forgive you. I forgive myself. Please forgive me. I forgive you. I forgive myself. What I like about that is, it actually starts with some humility. Please forgive me. So often we could be self-righteous in our forgiveness. Oh, I forgive you for all the ways in which you've harmed me, but, I don't need to necessarily ask for forgiveness. So through my process of working with this practice, I actually shifted them, because when I first heard them, it was like, I forgive you, please forgive me, I forgive myself. It was this kind of, it was just reversed. And I felt like, and Noah also, we were talking about it, and we've been teaching some retreats together. Talked about how it feels more like they're to come to the practice with some humility, because we've all caused harm. And even in conversation around forgiveness, I think it's important to recognize that I'm just a learner in this life. I fuck up all the time, and so are you. And me knowing that about myself. And for me, there was a little bit more humility in like, oh yeah, and this person struggles too, and has struggled. So maybe it's not your parents, and, maybe it's not, it's heavy. But, one of the things I'm super grateful for, besides this water, is that when my mother died, there was nothing left unsaid. There was nothing left unforgiven. And I feel really great about that. Because it could have been otherwise, So I feel like using the metta practice as the foundation to begin to kind of soften the heart. And then really leveling the playing field by seeing the suffering I've caused, the suffering that I've experienced, the suffering that you've caused, the suffering that you've experienced. And then through that, moving into forgiveness. There's this quote by Jack Kornfield, and I heard it on a retreat, and it's just always stuck with me. And it really helped me in this understanding of forgiveness. And it's that forgiveness is giving up hope for a better past. I was always like that. It just allowed, there was some kind of shift that took place. Forgiveness is giving up hope for a better past. So as we're holding to the wounds, we're really just deepening them. Really just kind of carrying them into the here and now. A lot of that is gone. This is why I like this idea of forgiveness and reconciliation being really two sides of the same coin, I guess you could say. So I'd like to shift into some of the practice. Yeah, but just before that, maybe open up for, is there any questions about anything I've kind of said so far before we shift into the forgiveness practice? Not necessarily story, but just kind of understanding. Is there anything that's like a barrier to the practice? I mean, there might be lots of barriers to the practice, right? But I mean, as specifically in regards to what I've said. Okay. Well, let's just jump in. So, finding a position, finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable, where you can be relaxed, alert. We'll be working with a few phrases. So let's go ahead and start with this, just allowing the eyes to close. Just kind of drop into some mindfulness of the body, the breath. hearing the bell. Just allowing the theme to be in the background of the mind. It's an understanding of forgiveness, reconciliation. Can begin to turn the attention towards this heart space or center. Some would call it this place of original goodness. Seeing if you can breathe into the heart space. This place within all of us that has a wholesome desire for happiness and well-being, peace and ease. So for the first few moments, really it's just working with the simplified version, not even thinking of anyone in particular, just repeating the phrases and seeing if you can kind of allow the phrases to wash through the mind and drop down into the heart. Please forgive me. I forgive you. I forgive myself. Just allowing those phrases to move through the mind, into the heart. Aimed at no one in particular, or no thing in particular, no offense. Please forgive me. I forgive you. I forgive myself. So the invitation is to just allow the words to float to the back of the mind. Drop back into this heart space. And just see what's present. What's happening here. This heart mind. And then if you feel comfortable, beginning to envision perhaps someone who you have harmed in some way, intentionally or unintentionally, through thought, word, or action. Again, the invitation is to not pick the most difficult person, or the most unforgivable offense, seemingly unforgivable. Start small. Start where you're ready. Envisioning in the heart, mind, someone who you have harmed. And then extending these phrases for the ways I have harmed you, intentionally or unintentionally. May they forgive me. For the ways I have harmed you. Maybe you can use their name. Intentionally or unintentionally. Through thought, word, or action. Please forgive me. I am just a learner in this life. When you feel ready, allowing this person, allowing this event or situation to move into the background of the mind. And thinking about ways in which you have been harmed, those who have intentionally or unintentionally caused you harm. Through thought, word, or action. And if you can, allowing them to come to mind. Perhaps the event. Using these phrases. I forgive you. For the harm you have caused. Whether intentionally or unintentionally. Thought, word, or action. I forgive you. If you feel called to, you can say their name. I forgive you for the ways in which you have caused me harm. Intentionally or unintentionally. Through thought, word, or action. I forgive you. Just as I am a learner in this life, so too are you. I forgive you. I'm now turning this practice of forgiveness to possibly the most difficult, to forgive ourselves. For the ways in which I have harmed myself. Intentionally or unintentionally. By word, thought, or action. May I forgive myself. for the ways I have harmed myself, intentionally or unintentionally, thought, word, or action. May I forgive myself. For the rest of the time, the invitation is to continue with the original phrases. Please forgive me. I forgive you. I forgive myself. Just creating space between each phrase for breath and awareness. Holding ourselves with this quality of forgiveness, reconciliation. Please forgive me. I forgive you. I forgive myself. So that was forgiveness practice. And I feel like it's important to, maybe this is a new practice for you. Maybe it's something you've been working with. It's important to just be gentle with ourselves and not to be harsh with ourselves if, I remember the first 20 times I tried to do this practice. It didn't work. It wasn't, I just couldn't get there. And maybe it's different for you. I'd like to open up to questions about this practice or any of the Brahma Viharas, any of the heart practices. So we're good. How was that?
Very
Difficult. Yeah. Do you want to say more about that, or?
Apparently there's a lot to forgive up there.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to focus on all the different through time.
Yeah.
Yesterday to 30 years ago.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. So this, it can seem like a lot. I remember one of the times I was having, I'd come up with different kind of scenarios in the mind, and it was like a group of people that were kind of like all kind of dark, like just silhouettes, and then like one would come to mind, would come to the front, and like the light, which like a spotlight would shine on them, and I would give forgiveness to that person. And then they would move, and then another one would rotate. And so there's, yeah. And we're often pretty shut off to this part of ourselves, because resentment is so warm and easy sometimes. Anger is so, that feeling of protection can feel empowering. Yet it hinders us as well. So, I titled this talk, freedom. Maybe it was freedom in forgiveness or freedom with forgiveness. And this understanding of freedom, I think we get a little bit confused because in our country, in America anyway, in the United States, this idea of we have lots of freedoms too, and it's really important for us to hold our freedoms, right? This like freedom to, freedom to, free speech, or freedom to civil rights, which is all, freedom to vote, freedom to be safe, freedom to do what we want, pursuit of happiness. These are all kind of freedoms too. And in Buddhism, it's a different kind of freedom. It's freedom from. Freedom from the afflicted states of mind. Freedom from greed, hatred, and delusion. Freedom from resentment. Freedom from carrying our past into our future. Maybe some of my thoughts about that. Any other thoughts, reflections, questions?
What are your thoughts on forgiveness for the sake of peace in itself?
Mm-hmm. Like internal peace or external peace?
External.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, so this is kind of the way of talking about reconciliation, right? This idea of like the quality of forgiveness, developing the quality of forgiveness within us. Yeah, and I'm a little bit, maybe I need a little bit more information, but what I'm understanding, or the way I'm making sense of what you're saying is, kind of for the good of all. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like really the best thing to do is to start here. Because out there's a lot of things we can't control.
If there's two people in conflict, and one doesn't deserve it and the other one doesn't want to give it, should there be forgiveness anyway?
Mm. I feel like that's my instinct is to take a step back and to really work on compassion, because there's maybe not ready for forgiveness at that point. I don't know about the deserving part, because that's a perception, right? Like the perception is that person isn't worthy of forgiveness. Donald Trump isn't worthy of forgiveness. But if I take a step back and see the suffering, the causes and conditions, and I extend more compassion, perhaps I'll get to that point. It's also why I talked about starting with that kind of foundation of loving kindness and just seeing that, all beings want to be happy. We have some pretty distorted ways of going about trying to seek happiness. I've met murderers, met drug dealers, been a drug dealer, all seeking happiness in a distorted way. So that's been my kind of practice, right? So this idea of starting there and then moving to, perhaps compassion. May I care about my suffering. May you care about your suffering. May my suffering lessen or be eased. May your suffering lessen or be eased. Maybe that's the place. Yeah. Did you have a question? Or I thought you were going to raise your hand.
I might have. I've been trying to figure out how to articulate it, but basically, what if I guess just use I statements, my perception of an event or events that have happened in the past have changed, or they do change, and I feel like out of that comes a sort of distorted kind of thing of forgiveness, where it's I don't really think that it happened anyway, or maybe it was not that person's fault. Is that, I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a clear. It's just kind of like this, forgiveness for the sense of peace or for the sake of peace. I feel like there's not a clear answer for that because it's kind of individual. But that's one of the things around this idea of more will be revealed, as we do this practice and as we become maybe more clear, start seeing things a little more clearly. Maybe we can make better sense of it. I'm a huge fan of practicing just those three phrases without using anyone as a point of contact. You know what I mean? So please, I mean, there's the I forgive myself, but not necessarily anything specific, but just repeating the phrases, please forgive me, I forgive you, I forgive myself, as a way to train. This is a training, as a way to train the heart mind. I kind of soften it. And I trust this practice. Really, I really trust this practice. Not just this practice, but really all of the practices that we teach here to transform the heart and mind. So not necessarily using it as forgiveness or like for any one specific person. Yeah.
I just remembered that I recently heard on a podcast or something that the way to change the way you act is to change the way you think, and the way to change the way you think is to change the words you use. So learn new words.
Mm-hmm.
And you saying to just repeat this internally in an infinity mirror per se, right? No specific person or event. Mm-hmm. When we see that to use it, it'll be familiar already. Mm-hmm. Is that closer to what?
Yeah, that's exactly what I feel like happens is we're training the mind to be used to or using these phrases. So when an opportunity does arise, or when the causes and conditions are right, or when we maybe do the formal practice or something, it's ingrained in us a little bit more. It's really like creating a new neural pathway. It's creating a new association. Yeah. I remember one particular time when I was just sitting on the beach and just using these phrases out just to the ocean, to this broadness. And it was really powerful because of that. Like there was no one specific. And I feel like I don't know, I guess the only way I kind of think about it is it's like tenderizing the heart. Yeah. Just that can be transformational. To just tenderize the heart a little bit. Like, do we really, like, what are we protecting anyway? I remember one of my teachers, I was on this retreat and I was just so, like, there was like this armor that was protected. I just, because I developed it when I was young. And one of my teachers said that to me. He said, what are you protecting anyway? And it just kind of was like, yeah. I mean, if we believe this teaching, there is no fixed and permanent self. What are we protecting? Our personality, our ego, our idea of who we think we are? Or are we just grasping to the pain, hoping for a better past? I don't know. Anyway, hopefully some of this that I said was useful or helpful. I apologize to the Instagram folks that it turned off, and then I was meditating, so I didn't turn it back on. Right. Please forgive me for all the ways in which I've caused you harm. So as you know, this center is run on the donation or the support of those who attend. And we have the card reader out, and there's also some bowls out there. The suggested donation is $15. Give what you can. And if there's nothing that you can give monetarily, it's totally okay. We don't charge for that, just that reason. Free of charge. But, maybe helping clean up or coming early, helping set up. Also, we kind of need people to help with different like marketing or making flyers or digital flyers or, things like that, things that kind of can help the center run. We're actually operating at a deficit and have been for quite some time. It's $3,000 a month to pay the bills for this center. I just feel like it's important to be transparent about that, and we've been at a deficit for some time. Oh, and Against the Stream, you can Venmo at Against the Stream. I think it's Against the Stream Meditation. I just forget whether it's center or not center. But it's on Venmo or PayPal if you want to do it online or later. I just want to say, be tender with yourself. If this was a kind of shaking practice, maybe, if you talk to someone you trust or you have a connection with, or write about it, journal about it a little bit. If there was tons of aversion or if it was difficult, forgive yourself. It's a practice. It can take lifetimes. All right, so any of the goodness that's been gained from our practice, from our time together, may this goodness be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May we all be free.